it takes genuine magic to craft a successful final boss. They need to paradoxically pose a serious challenge whilst simultaneously making the player feel empowered. If the final boss is too easy, then you risk ending your game on an anticlimax. Too difficult and it feels like you've made no progress at all. So ideally, the challenge of a final boss will come as a test of the skills and mechanics that you've learned over the course of the game, allowing you to show all of that off, but in a comprehensive, cumulative way. Then when you win, even if it was hard, you had to do so many things so well that you walked away feeling like the hero you just pretended to be. But that's unfortunately not the type of boss battles we're going to be talking about today, as it's underwhelming time, my friends. Toot toot! All aboard. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most underwhelming final fights in video games. Number 10. Hoit, Far Cry 3. Now, the Far Cry series is known for its eccentric villains, with Far Cry 3 ironically featuring the series' most and least memorable. After spending most of the game fighting against the psychotic Vas, who betrayed his tribe to the pirates he now commands, we're introduced to the man behind the man, Hoit, leader of the mercenary company occupying the game's setting of the Rook Islands. Vas is interesting, he's well written and impeccably performed. A deranged warrior poet with grandiose speeches and warped philosophical musings, he's manic and unpredictable, and the fight against him, during which you're under the influence of a powerful hallucinogen, might be a bit underwhelming, but it is at least fitting and fun. Hoit, however, is much more of a standard action movie villain, more of a gangster than anything. Upon confronting him, he's a little too cool for school as he recites your accomplishments over the game in an aloof and casual manner. Finally, after cutting off one of your fingers, you engage him in a short knife fight in the form of a quick-time event. After spending so much of the early game fighting against Vas, Hoit's entire anticlimactic arc feels kind of like an afterthought. Number 9. Ophion, Returnal. Developers House Marquee's roguelite bullet hell shooter Returnal is near as perfect as a game can get. It's fast-paced, challenging, features diverse weapons and enemies, and presents mysteries that truly make you hunger for each new story revelation. And that perfection arguably culminates in the game's penultimate boss, Nemesis. You see, Nemesis has all the spectacle of a final boss as you avoid laser beams and volleys of fire whilst navigating a series of platforms in perpetual freefall. It's exciting, stressful, and forces you to take advantage of most of the skills that you've gained up until this point. And when the fight ends, it's a pleasure to discover that there's actually more Returnal to be played, but if Nemesis made you sweat as much as it did, the prospect of an even more challenging boss is almost overwhelming. Well, that is until you meet it. You see, this is just a big blob of flesh and bones who has a lot in common with Mass Effect 2's Human Reaper, which we'll come to later. Aside from being similarly lacking in memorable visuals, it also employs the same strategy of just remaining motionless and alternating between predictable attacks and revealing bright, glowy weak points. Your skills will not be tested, and you will be left with more questions than answers here. Number 8. Alduin, The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim. Alduin the World Eater is the dragon god of destruction and the main villain of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. After making one of the best entrances in all of gaming, he remains a rarely encountered but nevertheless pervasive presence. Throughout the adventure, Alduin resurrects dead dragons who plague you throughout your quest. His mission, as you might have guessed, is to devour the world. Now, looking deeper into Elder Scrolls lore, he becomes even more of a big deal. As an aspect of the God of Time, it's not only Alduin's mission but his cosmic purpose to restart time. And in his hubris, he instead chose to conquer the world. Granted, the lore does establish the player's character Dragonborn as the one who can defeat Alduin, but for a primordial force of creation with the power to literally eat the world and create a whole new timeline, Alduin is a bit of a chump. Fighting him is exactly like fighting any of the dozens of dragons that you faced by that point. Make him land, attack, repeat. Except you now have the special ability to weaken him, making him a lot easier than those other dragons were. I'm just gonna say it, fighting a planet-eating god should be a lot more interesting than this. Number 7. Dr. Octopus, Spider-Man. After decades of games varying wildly in quality, Insomniac finally did the iconic web crawler justice with 2018's Spider-Man. Insomniac created a whole new and unique continuity that still retained every bit true to the character and the comics, albeit reimagined. It was kind of a remix of the best elements of Spider-Man, and one of those elements is the complicated relationship that Spider-Man has with many of his villains, the most iconic of which in this game being Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus. Over the course of this game, Peter works as Otto Otto's assistant, helping him to create the very mechanical arms that would inspire his supervillain moniker. So it was a bummer, to say the least, when all of that build-up ended with a dressed-up quick-time event. After a game full of diverse boss encounters that constantly escalated in challenge and spectacle, Insomniac ended things with a small arena fight consisting of timed dodges, spamming your web shooters, and pressing the triangle button when prompted. At least it's long and repeatedly stops the action for cutscenes, but follow-up Miles Morales ended with a much more conventional fight against a much less iconic character, but still managed to be 10 times more climactic in the process. Number 6. The Human Reaper, Mass Effect 2. When the original Mass Effect ended on the revelation that the antagonist Saren was being controlled by a synthetic alien race known as the Reapers, developer BioWare set the stage for an engrossing mystery. And Mass Effect 2 begins with humans being abducted en masse by a drone-like alien race called the Collectors, deepening that mystery. But it begs the question, why do the massive, powerful Reapers need to kidnap people? Well, as we soon learn, Reapers reproduce by converting massive amounts of biomass into new Reapers, who take on the form of the converted species, which is why they look so weird and intimidating. But as a result of harvesting humans, however, well, it's the Terminator. It's a giant baby Terminator. After all of that build-up, when the thing finally springs to life, it's downright comical as a giant legless T-800 contorts its stationary body trying to shoot you with lasers. You're basically just fighting a torso. As if it weren't disappointing enough, the fight itself boils down to shooting big glowing weak spots while avoiding some notably slow attacks. It's long, it's boring, and it's so very silly. Number 5. The Arkham Knight, Batman Arkham Knight. Batman Arkham Knight's open world is so full of optional storylines that your final boss could vary amongst multiple characters, but we're going to go with the one whom the game is named after, the Arkham Knight, aka Jason Todd. Formerly the second Robin, Jason Todd was, in the comics and the game, brutally beaten and presumably killed by the Joker, only to return years later seeking revenge on Batman for seemingly abandoning him. It was a twist that anyone even mildly familiar with Batman lore saw coming a mile away, but that was not just the only reason that he was a disappointment. Over the course of a protracted stealth segment, Jason will take up various sniper positions around the stage and summon reinforcements. All Batman has to do is find a way to get the drop on him, at which point a canned animation will play out, repeat a couple of times, and that's that. For an enemy who's supposed to know all of Batman's tricks, it's a little disappointing that he relies on cannon fodder. This should have been a fight that tested all of Batman's skills against a mirror image of himself. Instead, it's just like any of the game's other stealth segments, only more repetitive. Number 4. Evelyn, Resident Evil 7. Now, the Resident Evil series is really good at reinventing itself. When the original entries became stale, developer Capcom reinvigorated the series with Resident Evil 4, shifting to a third-person shooter style that still honoured its survival horror roots. This new wave, however, steadily declined before culminating in the convoluted, glorious mess that was Resident Evil 6. The action became ridiculous and the story incomprehensible, straying about as far from survival horror as it could. But once again, Capcom was able to breathe new life into the series with Resident Evil 7, making a drastic change to first person while dialing up the horror considerably. But when it came to the bosses, it peaks with the first one and actually steadily declines from there. You see, when you finally counter Evelyn, the girl responsible for the chaos you've endured, she transforms into a giant face. The first phase of this fight, such as it is, consists of just standing there unloading guns into her face while she writhes around yelling at you. For the second phase, you just lay there unloading your guns into her face while she writhes around yelling at you. Eventually, you're given a special weapon that you just unload into her face, yada yada yada. This time though, she dies. Congrats on holding a button down for a few minutes. Number 3. Dark Beast Ganon, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, depending on how you define a video game boss, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild either has a lot of them or hardly any. There are lots of strong boss-like enemies to be sought out, but going by the strictest definition of a unique, powerful enemy encountered at the end of a specific segment of the game, you mostly fight various elemental aspects of series antagonist Ganon. While these boss fights aren't spectacular, they're at least engaging with multiple aspects to consider. For example, you wouldn't want to fight Thunderblight Ganon with a bunch of metal equipment, as you'll keep getting shocked and stun-locked. Unfortunately, Ganon's final form, Dark Beast, falls into that familiar category of shoot the glowing weak spot. Even more disappointing, the weak glowing spots in this case are massive. Botching this fight would actually require more effort than winning it. What's more disappointing is that Dark Beast Ganon is awesome looking and just huge. Here we have a Shadow of the Colossus-sized boss in a game with climbing, jumping, and gliding mechanics, but all we do is shoot a few giant circles on his body, and that's that. Hyrule saved. Hooray? Number 2. Lambent Bumac, Gears of War 2. What is it with final bosses who just stand there and let you kill them? Is it a deadline issue, a budget issue? Well, whatever the case, Gears of War 2's Lambent Bumac falls squarely into this category. Now, Bumacs are an iconic enemy type from the series. Featured heavily in the original game's marketing, it definitely delivered. The Bumac fight was one of Gears' standout moments. Covered in armor and weapons, you had to fight while seeking cover from its hail of gunfire and rapid, relentless advancement. So at the end of Gears 2, when you witness a Bumac fall into the mutagenic emulsion substance, you think that you're in for a championship bout. Other similarly mutated enemies, referred to as Lambent, are typically stronger and less predictable, so when the Bumac emerges even bigger and covered in huge lashing tentacles, it's pretty intimidating, until you realise that it's completely immobile and that you're in a helicopter with a targeting gun that fires a massive laser from an orbiting satellite. You basically just fly around the thing, holding down the fire button until it dies, then cutscenes just do the rest. And number 1, Frank Fontaine, BioShock. Originally a smuggler in Rapture, the libertarian utopia gone wrong, Fontaine was the main opposition to the game's other major antagonist, Andrew Ryan. Disguised as a freedom fighter named Atlas, Fontaine guides your journey through Rapture like Virgil from Dante's Inferno. In a story full of plot twists, Fontaine is at the heart of most of them, including being directly responsible for most of the player's actions via mental conditioning. But in a game full of superpowered mutants and iconic big daddies, Fontaine is still just a guy, well, up until the final battle when he transforms into a shiny Hulk. The fight is disappointing because there isn't actually much to it, just avoid him and keep shooting, but even more disappointing is the fact that the game ends this way at all. You see, BioShock is an explicitly political game that explores and critiques the philosophies of libertarian author Ayn Rand. But while the entire game is spent investigating these themes embodied by the aforementioned Ryan, the fight against Fontaine is totally divorced from that subject matter. Well, not totally, I mean he's literally the cover of Atlas Shrugged come to life, but that, much like this boss fight, is not subtle at all. And there we go, my friends, those were the 10 most underwhelming final fights in video games. I hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Instagram at RetroJ, but the O is a 0, and it'd be great to see you over there. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Hope you're treating yourself well with love and respect, my friend. Because you deserve all the best things in life, alright? Like love, happiness, and success. And do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise. I want you to go out there and smash your life goals today because I bloody believe in you. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that. And I'll speak to you soon. Bye.